because I'm not institutionally connected, and I'm really, you know the word polymath?
No.
Well, it means somebody who gets pretty deeply into a lot of different fields and brings them together to solve certain problems. Comes from the Greek.
Nice.
And that's just the perfect description of me. And it's always been a blessing and a curse at the same time, because I'm sort of always the outside insider. I can move in and be part of some group, but I'm always bringing so many other things in that's not necessarily comfortable for them.
Yeah, good for you. Let's start at your beginnings. Where were you born, and when were you born?
Have you got recording on already?
Yep.
Oh, well, you're going to edit that part out, or?
No, I like that part.
Oh, boo. Okay, I was born during World War II. I will be 75 years old in a few months. I am the oldest son of an alcoholic World War II veteran. We moved 8 times before I finished high school, and I've probably moved at least 8 or 9 times since then. I've lived in Germany for a year and a half, but moving around started in my childhood. It was a very dysfunctional family. I was a very gifted kid, so between me and my dad, it was always the irresistible force meets the immovable object, kind of. Mm. And that has really characterized, my whole career. This moving, having interests that kind of go all over the place and collect things. I got very, very good during all that moving at becoming part of whatever culture I had to be, living in.
What month were you born in? Because I'm interested in your astrological sign.
March.
Is that Aries?
That's Pisces.
Pisces. And do you identify with being a Pisces?
Yeah, I think so.
Reluctantly, huh?
No, it's a double-edged thing, right? There's 2 fish swimming in opposite directions. It has its upper and its lower part. It's like the towel, and it fits in a way.
Mm. You said you were gifted. Does that mean that you're really bright? What else does it mean?
My parents wouldn't tell me my IQ. When I finished high school, I had the highest combined college board scores of anybody in the history of the high school. Mm. Like, a lot of people had 800 and then 600 in one, and I had, 770-ish in both of them. I was athletically gifted, intellectually gifted, and again, that's been great, and it's been also difficult.
What's difficult?
I sat one time with a bunch of Mensa people. Mensa is the high IQ society in New York City, around a table having dinner, and I was the only one who got a decent education. I was the only one who could survive in the school system. I was very blessed in that sense, but people with, super high levels of intelligence don't always do that well in our culture.
Because they get bored?
They get bored. I'm not sure all the reasons why. But we get into my religious background now, but I was raised Irish Catholic, and was educated by the Jesuits through college, and I got a super good education out of it.
And what about the guilt and sin part of Catholicism? Venial sins and mortal sins. Did that influence you, or did it not?
So I have 3 periods in terms of spirituality. I was raised a very, very fervent Catholic, and given that I had little peace in the family, school and church meant pretty much everything to me. So I was a very holy little kid. I bailed out of Catholicism in the sophomore year of college because it just was profoundly not making any sense anymore in all sorts of ways. And in graduate school, I was a martial artist and Zen Buddhist. Did 6 years, 6 years of that, 6 years of meditation. I actually had what's called a Kundalini accident towards the end of that. I call it my endarkenment because I, in some sense, saw God, but I was totally not prepared to do that. And the big message that came out of that was, listen, kid, you're in spiritual bypass. You need to get grounded and deal with all the trauma that you're carrying. And then the next period, after 12 years of rest, was I apprenticed to indigenous and mixed blood teachers and got a wonderful, wonderful spiritual experience from that. And that's home. That's home now.
Let's go back to the Kundalini experience. What triggered it?
Trying to get enlightened and skip the problems of this life.
Well, what was your method of trying to get enlightened?
Oh, I was doing Zen meditation. This was very early on. Before, I had read the 3 Pillars of Zen, which was Philip Kapleau's early book on Zen, and I just started doing it. And I was moving all over the country. It was during graduate school. I quit once, lived in Oakland. It was from Chicago to Oakland, back to Chicago to Ashland, Oregon, and then to New York City, all during that period. So I didn't have consistent teaching, and I'm a trauma therapist now. I work, and that's also one of my big research interests right now. And I just grew up in a very dysfunctional situation, was carrying a lot of my father's war trauma and a lot of individual trauma. And there wasn't really that much in the way of understanding or good therapy around back then. Does that answer the question?
So you were in meditation when the Kundalini kicked on?
Yeah.
And you saw God, but it was scary?
I saw God, but it was like seeing through this. It was a dirty white light. And I knew the dirt was mine. And I spent good 36 hours in and out of my body. Kind of went to purgatory in some sense. And it took a good month to get stable again. That is called a Kundalini accident, as you may know. That means raising those energies when the rest of your system is just not ready for it.
Right. I think Stanislav Grof talks about it and how some people, it feels like they're going insane if they haven't cleared. It can be very traumatic.
Well, I got the message.
And you're
really,
here to tell it.
I calmed down, and 12 years later I got involved with mixed blood and indigenous Native American teachers and did an apprenticeship, and that really cleared a lot of stuff and grounded me.
So do you think of yourself as a shaman or practicing shamanism?
I do. I taught it I taught shamanic practitioners from about 1986 I apprenticed. In 1990 I started doing circles. So from 1990 to 2007, 17 years, I was running vision quests and, circles and so on and so forth.
When I think of shamanism, I think of the shaman going maybe into the underworld, doing soul retrieval, contacting a power animal as an ally. How do you define what shamans do?
That all makes good sense. Although I would say that soul retrieval is just another name for trauma recovery.
I agree.
It's just a different cultural take on it. It's a slightly different method.
When you were doing that kind of work, did you find that you had parts that were separated that the people who were working with you helped you bring back and integrate into your psyche?
Some of that happened there, and some of that has happened since then. In the last 10 years, 11 years, in 2007, I've gotten all sorts of trainings, coaching, family constellations, energy psychology, and the way that I learn this stuff is I use on my clients what has worked on me. And it's very typical to go into some sort of therapy training and you're doing therapy on one another. And I've had various arrangements with, I do fairly heavy duty work with people, so I need, I wouldn't say mentors, but I need people that can help with the load that involves.
Now, what kind of meditation do you use to stay centered?
Music, woodwork, and I'll tell you just quite simply why. Between all the rosaries and mental prayer as a Catholic, which I never felt somehow worked, and then having this Kundalini thing, I don't easily meditate. And so I do it, but it doesn't go very deep because there's basically a scar there. From
the Catholic Church and the Kundalini experience.
That's what I believe, yeah.
Yeah. I want to get into the family constellation later. What have been the influences that made you go on to graduate school and become a scientist and do cognitive science and system theory and linguistics? What led you in that direction?
In high school, I basically loved math and physics, and I loved the Newtonian worldview and was good at it. But by junior year of college, I was realizing that I couldn't spend my time trying to figure out how many photons were coming out of a star a billion light years away because I was a crazy kid and I was suffering. And I had to get a little closer to home and start figuring out, like, how am I going to be okay here? All right. I ended up at University of Chicago, which was a very interdisciplinary place, thank God. And to me, I figured out very quickly that all the interesting knowledge was in the cracks. If you feed this people for 150 years into the same disciplines over and over, all the good stuff has been done. But I was able at the University of Chicago to take what the linguists and what the literary critics and what the etymologists and what the philosophers thought they knew about metaphor, all of them, and put it together with some stuff out of mathematics, fuzzy sets and computational modeling processes, and come up with a way to understand how we understand, how do we comprehend metaphorical language? At the time, the idea of metaphorical language was there will be some kind of restrictions on the words, like the rock speaks clearly, right? Well, rocks don't speak, so somehow there's a clash, and we know that's a metaphor. And in 1969, I walked into the Chicago Linguistic Society with a paper called the Semantics of Metaphor, and I said, well, here's a bunch of sentences like the rock is turning brittle with age, and if you say them next to a cliff, it means I can chip it with my hammer. But if I say it about the president or my grandfather, it means he's getting senile. So there's nothing in that sentence that's going to tell you that it's metaphorical or not. Something profoundly different is going on.
And what is that profound difference?
Oh, that's kind of some of these answers are maybe a little complicated.
Okay. What's systems theory?
Systems theory is the study of how groups of things interact together, whether it's people or machines or parts of your brain or body or whatever. And it turns out there's various, there's been a lot of discoveries around that. So there is, systems behave in certain ways. Certain kinds of systems behave in certain ways. we are highly adaptable. We are highly adaptable open humans. We are highly adaptable open systems that display what's called emergent properties, which means that you can't explain the behavior of the whole by looking at the behavior of the parts. Right? That was the essence of kind of the materialistic, reductionistic, Newtonian, Cartesian worldview. Was it's a machine. We can just take the parts and we can predict the behavior of the whole, and that's not true for adaptable systems in an open environment. And so all sorts of interesting things happen.
And then you went on to teach in university and to work in corporations. What are those cultures like? Are there big differences, or are they essentially, like primate dominance hierarchies wherever you work?
Well, University of Chicago was a pretty good place, I thought. It was intellectually honest and you could do things there. Columbia University was 5 different institutions: Barnard College and the graduate faculties and Uni Theological Seminary, and one more, the hospital. And there were 5 deans of everything. And so there was an awful lot of politicking and stuff that went on there. And at the time, I was just not prepared at all I was prepared to be brilliant and figure things out, but I did not get politics at all. I discovered the Conduit Metaphor there and jump-started a whole kind of study of conceptual metaphor and languages. But then I walked out and just didn't want anything more to do with the university. So to get back to your question, some of it's the same. There's politics everywhere, if that's what's at stake. For me, it was like I already knew how to program. I just had to support myself, and I started building business systems for people, programming in Business Basic first, and a couple of other things, and then on into FileMaker eventually. And what draws everything I do together is metaphor, systems, symbols, all leading to the systemic qualities and behavior of trauma. So it seems it spreads over a wide area, but that's what holds it together.
Got it. The book by Frans de Waal called Chimpanzee Politics, about a band of chimps in an island in, I think, Denmark, that explained my academic experience so well. It was just perfect. The dominance hierarchies, the fluffing up, looking bigger, where you sat, was your office big or little, or windows or not. So I think it's probably the same in any place where there's humans working together.
I think I experienced less of it in the business world. It was more pragmatic and it was more grounded. I don't think that I think the universities have been failing at their teaching job for a long time. They are not teaching people to think. They're, imparting bodies of knowledge, but they're not teaching people how to use them. They're not teaching people how to sit down with somebody that they don't agree with and come to some sort of understanding or consensus. And you can see that all over the world right now, big time.
So if you were made the president of Columbia and all its colleges, how would you implement that kind of policy that students learn to think and apply?
I don't know. University of Chicago was famous for something called the Great Books Program, which I was very happily exposed to at the University of Santa Clara, which was a Jesuit institution in California. The Great Books Program says you sit down with the classics and you read them, and you don't look at secondary sources, and your teacher asks you questions, and you figure out whether this means any damn thing to you or not. And if it does mean something to you, then you go back to the text and you say, this is where I got that. And you know, have friendly, hopefully, arguments with people about how you understand it. And that taught me to think. So at Columbia and at Southern Oregon College, where I taught first, you know, I was doing that. I didn't want to read. I didn't want to have my students read 15 great books in one semester. They didn't get anything out of that except that they could figure out what I thought they should think or some critic thought they should think. I wanted them to read 5 books a semester and dig into them and talk to one another and be able to be articulate and clear about why they thought this was nonsense or meant something and so on. And the interesting thing about that is that at Southern Oregon College, the kids believed me. They were just kids from the pear orchards or whatever. I mean, they were not bright kids. So they took me seriously, and they did it, and they got pretty good at it. I got to Columbia and tried to do the same thing. It was a battle with both the faculty and the students, because the students were high-level preppies, and they did not believe me. They didn't believe me when I said, just, there's no right answer, just, you know, answer the questions and be able to support your answers. I don't care what I think, right? They didn't believe, they knew that had to be some kind of trick. and the faculties, you know, they still wanted their 12 books a semester, right? So I don't know if I were president of Columbia University how I would institute that, especially the way universities have gone now, right, with the changes and everything.
A lot of online teaching, distance teaching, where there's not even a good forum for discussion.
Indeed, and the issues about grades and parents, you know, they're more like strange trade schools in a way, or whatever. Anyway, that's a whole other subject.
No, I think we tell the students that you've got to go to college so you can get a good job. We don't say you've got to go to college so you learn to think and be educated.
You cannot have a democracy if the people in the democracy don't know how to think, talk, and come to consensus.
I think we're seeing that right now, correct?
Completely. Completely. We're also seeing something else that's very important. We're seeing the emergence of all these collectives, these tribal enclaves, which is one of my big interests right now. That this gets us into what's a family soul and what's a collective soul and some of the other questions that you asked later.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get to it. What have been your most difficult challenges and how have you faced them? I think that's a good interest point for readers.
As I said before, and I don't mean to sound puffed up or anything, but it's very difficult to be a polymath. It's very difficult in a society that values specialism and minute expertise and splits everything up into smaller and smaller specialisms. It's very difficult to be a generalist and someone who's has enough depth in a bunch of different fields. I mean, I can talk to you about math, I can talk to you about philosophy, I can talk to you about literature, and do you understand me? And that's not necessarily that's not thought well of in our society. Like, I mean, I'm a decathlon or a pentathlon person, right? I'm not the best sprinter in the world, but I'm good enough, do you understand me, to put things together.
Right.
And synthesizing has just been the whole name of what I do. That has a difficulty associated. I also I grew up moving on all the time. And that persisted into adulthood, and that means that even though I've had an intellectually and emotionally wonderful, adventurous life, and I'm approaching 3/4 of a century, and I'm in pretty good shape here, I don't have a big following. The Conduit Metaphor paper that I wrote in 1977, if you look at Google Scholar, you will see 3,770 citations. That is astronomical. There are 1,100 citations in the last, 5 years, which means that was something hugely groundbreaking, but I'm not around to benefit from it. That's challenging. I would very much like to write a book about it, but I don't have graduate students to help, and I have to support it by doing my own work or whatever. Do you understand me? I don't have it has been wonderful being able to go without institutional affiliations wherever I was led, but it has its downside. Right? The downside is I don't have,
the support.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't written 20 books and I'm a full professor or something like that, which I easily would have or could have been if I had stayed. See, there was no internet until 1995. So from 1978, when I left, through 1995, I had no idea that anybody had paid any attention at all to anything that I had written. In 95, when I got on the internet, I found out, oh goodness, George Lakoff said I helped found cognitive science, and you can look on Wikipedia. There's an article, and I was like, oh my God. I just figured people would steal the ideas and not give me credit, but that didn't happen. And the conduit metaphor is a profoundly important thing because basically our language has a model, a folk model embedded in it of how it works, and that model is grossly, terribly wrong and misleading. It gets us in trouble all over the place.
Does it affect our political speech?
It affects everything. And it's a tricky thing to talk about because I have to kind of get you into a paradigm shift but I mean, the English language believes that what we do when we communicate is put our meaning into the words, send the words over to you like a package, and you unpack them and get my meaning out of those words. That don't happen. Words are scratches. I'm squeaking at you now. These are just squeaks. Just noises. They have no insides. Do you understand me?
No.
And you take those noises and you use them in this very sophisticated way as instructions to build emotional and conceptual structures in your head. And God knows if they're the same thing that was in my head.
Oh, yeah.
When I made these noises. But everything in the way the English language talks about itself says that I put the meaning in the words. And that if you didn't get it out, you're at fault. Because I said it. I found about 140 different expressions that were, it's pervasive. And I mean, it's beyond me right now to try to trot out a bunch of examples, but.
Okay. A lot of the people that I've been interviewing have had experiences of synchronicity. As they start focusing on a spiritual path, things start coming together in unusual ways. I'm wondering if that's true for you as well.
It's very true.
Can you give me an example?
There's so many, I'm not sure where to start. Let me give you an example of something else. I've had experiences transfer between lives.
Ooh, let's hear about that.
I've had experiences. Well, I'll tell you this one. I was helping to host in 1992. I was helping to host the Native American East Coast celebration in honor of Columbus Day, which Native Americans do not want to call Columbus Day. And I was involved with some very powerful medicine people. And one day I was leaving a parking lot a couple of weeks beforehand in my VW van, and I felt a bump, and I went out, and the right front tire was literally turned around facing backwards. I couldn't believe it. It was turned around facing backwards. So I got it towed, and it was Friday, and Monday we went back in there to look at it, and the damn tire was back again. It was straight again. 2 weeks later, while I was very busy running this, helping, two of us were running this festival, my van, the right front tire rolled into a ditch. And there was a huge jolt. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I've done something really bad. Nothing happened. It was fine.
You mean the tires separated, or the whole van went down with it?
Here's the two front tires, right? It's okay for them to do this.
Yeah.
It's not okay for one of them to go all the way like this by itself.
No.
No. All right, that's what would have happened when I hit that ditch. And in fact, it happened 2 weeks beforehand, and I knew that these medicine men were playing with me.
Oh.
They're not playing with me, but that literally they had. I don't know how to say this. This stuff is hard to talk about, but somehow, however this works, I was going to have that accident at a time when I was badly needed to run this whole thing, this whole festival thing. And so that wasn't going to be allowed to happen. So this event got transferred back 2 weeks earlier, right? And then it magically got fixed the next, 2 days later. I regarded that as a transfer of effects from the future, into the past, if that makes sense to you. As far as examples of synchronicities, geez. Let me tell you what I think synchronicities are.
Love it.
If we think of reality is emerging. Reality is a process of emerging from a deeper consciousness, I would say. Consciousness-based. And it emerges in different levels. And when we get up here on the surface, we see two things happen that seem, oh my God, how could they possibly be connected? Does that make sense? But they're connected. It's like, oh my God, look at this. How could that be? How could I meet this person? Or how could this tree fall just then, or something like that? But what if, in the process, as we move down through these levels of emergence, things are sorted out differently? That people that are akin to us in various ways they're right next to us there. They're not separated.
They're entangled, to use a physics term.
Yeah. They're entangled down here on level 6 and up on level 12 where it emerges into reality. They look like that's amazing, but it's not. And that is exactly the way Noam Chomsky's notion of generative grammar worked, essentially, that there was a deep structure and a surface structure, and that the deep structure was arranged differently from the way things emerged on the surface. And I think that's probably true of reality as well.
Well, quantum physics probably confirms that, right?
I think quantum physics is a philosophical quagmire. Descartes and Newton put something together that became our mainstream worldview. It's coherent, if limited and problematic in certain ways.
It's mechanistic, materialist.
And reductionist. And so the quantum theory has been so mysterious that the maxim has been shut up and calculate. Shut up and calculate. Don't ask these questions. Hold on, let me just get the right reference. Rosenbaum and Kushner, The Quantum Enigma, written in 2011, is the best book on this. It's called The Quantum Enigma, Physics Encounters Consciousness. There's 12 different ideas about how do we understand quantum physics. And the thing is, all of them are ways of trying to keep consciousness out of it. And you can't keep consciousness out of it. And we don't, if if the mainstream thought process allows that consciousness is a prime, that it's, do you understand me, that you know, motion and energy and things like this are epiphenomenon, they're not primarily what's going on. There's something deeper is happening. That just overturns the whole paradigm of modern society. So quantum physics is enormously interesting. It's leading in the right direction. But as far as some kind of coherent explanations of how psychic phenomena work and things like this, it's not the last word. I mean, it's barely the beginning, if that makes sense.
But doesn't non-locality and the quantum information field and entanglement and those kind of laws explain information transfer and healing or intuition or whatever?
I think they're great leads. They're great analogies. They're great things that need to be followed up in various ways. And as you know, Dean Radin and various people have done an awful lot of that. But I don't think that just to use a word, to take the physics concept of entanglement and use it about people or things like that, that's a metaphor. That's fine, it's good, it's helpful, but it's not a model yet, if that makes sense. We don't understand this yet.
Right. We don't understand how entangled particles can affect each other from a distance.
Distance isn't real.
No space, no time.
Yeah, and we have a linguistic problem there too, because the minute you say outside of space and time, you've made another space metaphor. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the same. It's similar to the conduit metaphor. It's hard to get out of it because there's no language for it. You know, you say outside of space and time, beneath space and time. Those are all space metaphors, right? So you're postulating some another space that's bigger. The only thing that works that I know of is we talk about non-local, atemporal. That doesn't involve any kinds of, you know, extraneous space or time that we put the littler space and time into. I mean, it's fascinating stuff.
It is. How do you define consciousness?
Why don't you ask me an easy question?
No way.
How do I define it? I wouldn't attempt it. I really wouldn't attempt it.
Well, define it to a 10th grader.
Well, you could say, you know, it's awareness, and then you've got to bring in, well, okay, awareness typically is of something, so now we've got two parts, and now we're looking at something like the Tao, right? You know, the yin-yang. Yeah, the yin-yang symbol. I mean, this gets profoundly paradoxical. There are, I can't cite the stuff for you, but I've read recently, I think Daniel Dennett and somebody else have written some interesting things about kinds of consciousness in the brain. And there are different kinds.
Do you mean brain waves like delta, theta, beta, or something other than that?
You know, I read a lot. I'm 75 years old, and I'm not real good at pulling up the references unless I have time to go and look. So I hope you could allow me that.
Sure. So what do you, at this point, how do you think about God? Do you think that's a useful concept or not?
You know, I'm an animist. I believe that I look out of my senses and I'm seeing God's fingers. God's in everything. God's not a guy or a gal. God's God's the whole thing. There isn't any real duality between spirit and flesh, between matter and spirit. These are hard things to talk about. That which is divine, the divine, I call it the God energy or something. I'm looking out of my senses. As far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at the God energy presenting itself to me in a conversation that's going on between my little monad, my little, I'm a little image of it, and then there's the big one out there, and the two of us are interacting. But we're both, we're both forms of consciousness. I mean, my cars are alive.
They are?
They help me. Everything around me is alive. That's shamanism. Everything, my teachers would say everything has a spirit. There's all sorts of different ways to... But again, we're stuck with the language because we have to say everything. And once we say thing, that means it's a dead lump, right? It's just lumps bumping. That's all. That's all that's happening. Lumps bumping, the big universe lumps bumping, we mean nothing in it because we're so small and it's so big. And that is a false perspective. If we are one of the highest forms of consciousness that we know of, then no, we have profound central place in what's going on because we are co-creating this whole dance here. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. When you've worked with shamans and done healing work yourself, does the healing happen with the help of a power animal or a spirit guide or an ancestor? What's the process of doing an emotional or physical healing for someone?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of tools. Some of them are shamanic, some of them are, EFT and tapping tools, coaching tools. All healing, in my opinion, involves another person, myself, and spirit with capital S. And I'm a midwife. I am trying to figure out, every one of these people that I work with is a big mystery. That's part of why it's interesting. It's totally fascinating because everybody is so profoundly different, and what helps one person put themselves back together, because trauma dismembers people physically and mentally. It cuts off parts of them from other parts of them. And so you're trying to help put them back together. And you're midwifing a kind of birth process. So you don't, to say, I heal you, nah, I don't do that. Do you understand me in the clearest sense?
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I do a bunch of things, and I hopefully help your organism, which includes, again, the higher organism of the family that you belong to, and in some cases the higher organism of the race that you belong to, put itself back together in terms of some problem that you want to solve. If that makes sense.
Right.
And and insofar as, insofar as I use shamanic tools, which I do with some people, then yes, there may be a power animal involved. I have I'm very close to certain animals. I have certain whatever you call it. I'm a linguist, so I speak a lot of different languages to people. But I have my helping spirits. I have my middle name is Cougar. My native medicine name is Cougar. That's my main totem. And is that, what is it? It's an archetype, if you ask me. It's the whole species. It's the archetype of that species in its relationship to the world around us, right? And it might involve some particular physical cougar at some point, but it's that larger, I don't know, archetype is the best word. And so, yeah, I'll use those at times. But with people who don't want to do that, I don't use it. Do you understand me? I mean,
do you have any of your ancestors that help you?
Yes.
Do the ancestors of the people that you're working with to help heal ever come in?
Well, since I do family constellation work, that's a big part of it.
Yeah,
there's two kinds of trauma. There's the kind you experience yourself, and then there's the kind that you inherit. And you inherit it when it has not, there's been either no chance or no willingness to deal with it in an ancestor someplace. And it's big enough and important enough that it affected the whole family. Then it passes down. Your question in the notes about load balancing, right? Do you remember that one? If you've got a website being hit by too many people, there'll be an array of, say, 5 servers. And when one server gets overloaded, it'll kick those hits off to the next one. And when that's load balancing. So they'll all be sharing the load. And the family system or family soul is capable of pushing stuff downstream that it can't deal with. So we've got people in the Holocaust or something like this, and there's no chance for them to resolve what happened to them before they die. But they have ancestors, and they have this collective called the Jewish religion and the Jewish race. And these are real psychologically energetic and psychic organisms. I mean, they exist, and I'm going on a bit here, but I mean, one of the biggest problems we have in our culture right now is we don't understand that we are hardwired to form collectives. We form collective intelligences that are subconscious. We're networked. Everybody in the family is networked, and there's a subconscious stuff going on that is a larger organism that has a job to do. Its job is to pass life with love down through the generations. And it has, the way that it tries to do it is maximize harmonious inclusion and so on, various characteristics. It's real.
It's like Jung's collective conscious, only it's narrowed down to a family.
Yeah.
And you said in your book that like in-laws and adoptive parents or children, they don't have to be biologically have shared genes to be in the family soul, right?
Right. Depends on how their impact on the fate of the family and the fates of the people. Hellinger, who synthesized a lot of the family constellation stuff, called families communities of fate. And generational inherited trauma are displacements. They are displacements of fate. Like, I ended up in my 60s suffering tremendous foot pain, and it was my dad's.
Tell about his feet that during the war that you carried for him.
He froze them in the Aleutians, and then went to officers training school and had abscesses and things all over them and had to get through officers training school, and so he just taped him up and did the 20-mile marches, and then he went to Okinawa, which was, the worst battle of the Pacific, if not the Second World War. And he came back, and he never came back in Seoul. I mean, he eventually stopped being an alcoholic long after I was grown up, but there was no notion of PTSD. There was no alcohol. Well, Alcoholics Anonymous existed, but my mom didn't find out about it till I was in 8th grade. And my dad didn't get into it till I was out of high school. So I was carrying it for him. Do you understand me?
Yeah. We are born, we are helpless, we come in innocent, full of love, wanting to somehow, and we're utterly helpless, right? And we depend completely on these caregivers, and we instinctively, some of this is psychic, some of this is epigenetic, some of this is behavioral, but we take on portions of
what's in the family trauma backpack, so to speak, because we need to keep we need that family to exist, or we won't exist. And this is pre-conscious. Do you understand me? This is not anybody thinking about anything. That this is we call it blind love. It's quite real. So even though I really hated my father in many ways, still I loved him in other ways and was trying very hard to help him continue to be able to support the family, which he did, and so on and so forth. And that didn't really emerge until I was in my early 60s with this just incurable, immense pain in my feet, which I finally discovered family constellations, and somebody told me, maybe this isn't yours. And I got driven down to South Carolina and did a constellation, as I wrote in the prologue to Health, Happiness, and Family Constellations. And everything started to turn around. It was like, oh my God, this is not mine. This is my dad's fate, not mine. And within a few months, that was gone. And I was convinced, okay, I needed to learn how to do this.
Some people talk about a genetic memory, or homeopathists talk about a miasm, that there's a family kind of shadow that in terms of health issues or whatever. So I'm trying to understand the mechanism for how this unconscious process works.
First of all, epigenetics is has to do with the switches that turn genes on and off. So even though the DNA that passes doesn't change unless there's a mutation, right? All the switches are heritable. So that means you can inherit switches. You can inherit there's a complicated whole computer, literally, of methyl molecules that turn genes on and off. Those are heritable. So you can literally inherit that way. You inherit behaviorally. Like if a child grows up in a black family and mom and dad are always scared, I won't say scared senseless of police, they're going to be scared of police, right? And then there's some psychic aspect of this that is, you know, we don't understand yet how psychic stuff works. We know it works. The research for psychic phenomenon is so much better because it's been attacked so much. It is way better than most research out there, you know, in terms of effect size, the file drawer effect, meta studies. It is now, it's fair to say that mainstream scientists are being totally superstitious by not believing in it.
Yeah,
right?
Dean Radin shows the probability, you know, thousands of times beyond chance that you'd have this effect, and
yeah,
and it's.
But in terms of how heritable trauma works, I think it's epigenetic, it's behavioral, and it's psychic in some sense that we don't fully understand.
So you talk about the family as a soul, the religious group as a soul, the ethnic group as a soul. So you kind of inherited a white Catholic, whatever your particular family issues were, all these souls kind of overlap.
Can I show you a picture of that?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen. I hope I'm going to share the screen. So, and now we go over here. So you should be seeing something that says four nested.
We do.
Yeah. So each one of these is an organism. It's an organism. You know, Dan Siegel is the best. Dan Siegel's book Mindsight is probably the best book to read to get a sense of this. Hardwired into all of us is a social empathy system that functions subconsciously, that networks with the people around us. And each one of those networks is its own thing. Just go to a cocktail party and notice the group that forms so they all have somebody to talk to and they're cool, and then the other ones that don't belong to that group. And we're always doing that. So you can look at the internal parts of a person, right? The persona, the parts in a person. You can look at a family. You can look at the ancestors. You can look at the businesses, nations, and religions that affect us, and we're all nested inside these things, and we are affected by. If there's trauma here, if there's trauma in this, will create trauma in this. It'll create trauma in this. It'll create trauma in this, and then these kids will grow up. And they'll create more traumatized businesses and religions and so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But this is it's called nesting, and this gets us back to systems theory and things like that.
And is this from Siegel? The nests?
Well, what I said to you about the hardwired social empathy system, that's Dan Siegel is really the guy who kind of got that ball rolling. It's called social neurobiology now, and there's a lot of people working in it. That's not mine, that's his. Mm-hmm. These slides are my depictions of what we were talking about, that we belong to these collective intelligences. We remain the expression of them.
So it goes inner family to family of origin to ancestral family to larger organizations. And the title of this is A Cascade of Damage, Trauma Propagates Through These Levels.
That's what it says, yes.
So if you were going to apply this to Native Americans, because they have been so traumatized, how could the young people today be healed from that intense trauma that most Native Americans have experienced generationally?
Have you got my picture back?
Yes.
You ask big questions. Very big questions. So they have inherited from their ancestors genocide via disease, war, theft of land, big stuff, right? That stuff creates individual trauma in their lives.
Alcoholism, lack of education,
They get sent to Indian schools, all this stuff, right? So you have the whole collective is wounded, and the individuals in the collective are wounded. How do you fix it? You go to work on various individuals who are willing and try hard to get them clear, right? To patch up the damage so that they can somehow help patch it up in other people. One of your questions towards the end of what you sent me was, is there hope for the world and all this kind of stuff? And to my mind, the biggest hope for the world right now is what we are seeing is we're seeing collective trauma come out of the box. The Me Too movement, the white nationalists, we're seeing the trauma in these different groups that was always kind of here, but was beneath the surface, kept politely beneath it. It is coming out big time. That's bad in one sense, because it's fragmenting the heck out of us. But in another sense, it's visible, and we can start to address it.
Right.
And the missing link, in my opinion, and this is something I would still like to write about if I get the chance, the missing link is we do not understand our collective natures. We think of ourselves as individuals, especially in this culture. Yeah. We're the rugged individualists.
Yeah.
We don't understand that we are constant. Here, can I show you another quick slide?
Please.
Okay, so share screen. So here, this is a pure group intelligence. There's this African termite colony, right? It does the amazing, responsive, adaptive things and has no brain. It digs, it has gardens, it has ventilation, it has drainage, it can forage for food, it can fight wars, it knows when it's time to pick up and move this whole thing and rebuild it again a mile away. Am I making sense?
Yes.
And there's no brain. Where is the intelligence? Well, each individual is like a neuron. It's a distributed collective intelligence. That's the systems theory term for it, right? It's distributed, it's collective. Distributed means it doesn't exist in any individual, it exists in the networked interaction of those individuals. Then if we start with this kind of pure group intelligence and we start scaling up through the species, we go to herd animals and pack hunters and primates and humans, this distributed social intelligence, it doesn't go away. It gets bigger, except that on top of it now we've started to add all kinds of individual intelligence. So now we've got this issue of how do we get the individual and the intelligence of an individual in sync with the group intelligence that of the collectives that they belong to. And we pretend that this kind of doesn't exist, especially in the United States. If you go to China or Japan, there's much deeper sense of it, right? The collective.
Yes.
But there, I would say in some cases, they're emphasizing this social intelligence too much, and there's not enough respect for individual intelligence. So we have a big, hard balancing job, and we pretend like this doesn't exist, that it can't be traumatized itself, that it can't flow trauma to the individual, that the individuals. So in the fact that there's so much coming up right now, there's a chance at least for these newer understandings of individual and collective trauma to maybe start having an impact.
Do you know of any schools that that provide students with this kind of support? They've maybe done some around bullying, helping kids who feel bullied. Maybe some after disasters like Katrina, that they'll provide support in school. Do you know of any models of schools who are helping with these traumas for kids?
I don't. I mean, these things. There is an awareness, and it is helping. The Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology is a group that I belong to, and there are studies. EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, which is a meridian tapping trauma healing technique. There's studies, and it's an evidence-based process. It's the only one that the American Psychological Association will accept these days. And people have gone off to Rwanda and places like this and done EFT on the populations of kids and adults there and had really good results. So stuff like this is happening, but the mainstream of psychology and psychology is still drug-based, right? It's still on the medical model of this is something we'll give it some, we'll sell it some drugs. Cognitive behavioral therapy is good, but it doesn't address these larger issues. Look, there are times when you cannot get an individual well because the individual is entangled with a family, and unless you deal with the family system in some way, they're not going to change because they are required in that system to be the scapegoat or to be something, right? And you can't peel them away from that unless they exit the family, and they're not going to typically, belonging to a family is one of our most profound desires, built into us. We need to. What's her name? Born to Bond. Lynn McTaggart. In the book Born to Bond, she says we're born to bond. Darwin's thing of survival of the fittest. That is slowly. I mean, there's truth in that, but it's slowly also being replaced with something that says, no, it's survival of the successfully bonded.
Mm-hmm. And altruism happens in all kinds of species.
Yeah.
because it helps the group.
Yeah.
So if you're working with a family constellations session, can you give us an example of one that you've done, how you brought in people from the audience to serve as surrogate family members? How does it work if someone was curious about family constellation therapy?
Another really big question. There's two forms. There's the private and there's the group form. In a group form, you're essentially sitting a client next to you and asking, what is it you would like to change for the better? And maybe I should, let me just see, I think I can show you another picture here. Yeah, I can. 1 second and we'll, here. Okay, so constellations have group and private forms. The private form looks like Santre therapy. Is that term familiar to you? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And the group form looks like slow, largely silent psychodrama, unscripted. So this is a picture, a model of a constellation. Again, how deep do you want to go? How fast? These are people standing around, and so this is a person from a circle of people in a workshop who is representing a grandfather. No, this is the father, and this represents the client. The client sits there and picks. You say to the client, please pick someone to represent your father. Pick someone to represent the problem. Pick someone to represent your mom, or whatever you think is relevant. And what you're doing is you're building on the floor an image of the family system. And in patient, careful way, people will, you could call it channeling, I don't know what, they will start picking up and responding in ways that tell you what's going on in that system. And as you start to see what's blocking, right, then you go to your midwife routine and you start trying to, speak the secrets of the system, because there's stuff that's dividing people. There's stuff that they can't talk about, or haven't talked about, that is dismembering this family. I hope I'm making some kind of sense.
Yes.
In this case, what this is showing is, so this is I can tell you this story. I don't know how much time we've got. This is an example I used called Terrible Migraines Fade. And if anybody wants to go to tinyurl.com/Constellation 3D, you can see a 15-minute video that actually develops this constellation. But we've got a guy named Don, and he's got really bad migraines that come in the fall. And we asked some questions about his birth family, and that seems to be okay. So we go back to the grandparents and his father's father and mother. The older brother of the father fell through a stair railing at 4 years old, hit his head on the floor, got a concussion, and died, never regained consciousness. Now, if Grandma and Grandpa and Dad, as the second brother, had mourned this, do you understand me? Had gone through a grief process and dealt with this in their lives, that's one thing. But what happened was, well, the stair railing needed fixing and Grandpa was slow fixing it, so Grandma blamed him for not fixing the stair railing. Then Grandpa turned around and blamed Grandma for not watching the oldest child of 4 years old. So instead of processing this trauma, they got bitter. They shut down towards one another. The whole family went into a kind of traumatized state. And now we have a grandchild who's feeling the damage who's feeling for the whole family this head trauma. Am I making sense?
So literally he has head pain just like the 4-year-old did.
Just like my feet that I was carrying for my dad.
Yeah.
The 4-year-old died.
Yeah.
The 4-year-old was killed.
But it had to do with his head.
Yeah, that's the lead. That's the thing that makes us, see if this works. See if this. All of this comes down to, does it heal or not? All right. Yeah. It's not whether it's all pretty and dramatic or not. It's whether it makes people better. But right now, what you see here is a picture of. Well, I don't have that in this group of slides. Wait, no. Here we go. Oh yeah. Here's the beginning of this constellation. So this is the client. It's a representative for the client. The client is still sitting next to me. This is the lost uncle who's had his untimely death is represented by him laying down. This is grandma, grandpa, and dad. So you notice that the only one, and this is an arbitrary, intuitive setup. Do you understand me?
Yes.
The client who placed these people didn't think about this, didn't have any idea what the heck was going on. He just stuck them out there. And pretty soon they're feeling stuff. So the only one here who's looking at the uncle is Don. His brother's not. His grandma and grandpa have their backs to one another, and they are turned away from here. So we have a picture here of a disjointed family. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we have at least a test here, at least an idea that probably it's Don who's doing the grieving, or Don's body, without him being conscious of why. That the social empathy system in Don's body has picked up all the grief and pain that these people suppressed, and it's manifesting as migraine. So our job here in this particular constellation is to see if we can't midwife a situation in which grandma and grandpa kind of are willing to forgive one another, turn around, look at their son, do you understand me, and take back, because he's experiencing in his body the fate of these people. And I think this is a picture of what it would look like if it worked. That grandma and grandpa would be reconciled, dad. So this family now looks like it's dealing with what happened to it. Making sense?
Yeah. So the slide says, "Thank you for carrying this, but it's our fate, not yours. Leave it now with us." And grandma and grandpa are together. Everybody's looking at the 4-year-old, so they're not turned away from each other anymore.
Yes. Now that happened over a series of steps. It's not just like, you can't just say, okay, you guys turn around and do this. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
It started by going to grandpa and saying, you got a grandson here who's suffering intensely. Could you even look at him? Could you look at him? He's right down there by your son that you lost. Is that what you want? And then go away and leave him alone a while and see what he does. And in fact, the people, I don't know how to explain this. Do you understand me? It's just like it's a psychic phenomenon. The people start resonating to the truth of the family system. If you do this carefully, well, and with respect, they will resonate to the truths in the family system. And as you get a picture of what's going on, you can try to nudge midwife and help them to clear things up, so that the people that are mourning for the lost child are the people who experienced the lost child, not a grandson who never even, who knows about this in a superficial way, but never even considered that he's got anything to do with it. I hope that makes some sense.
Absolutely. So how does a home altar work? Because someone could play with this in their own home at their own time frame.
Okay, so let me I guess I won't stop sharing. So if this constellation were being done here, I mean, this is a little elaborate, and I don't think, well, no, here we go. All right. It's a good thing these slides are here.
Yeah.
So, all right, here is an initial setup of a home altar done by a client, okay? This is real. So the client's problem is she doesn't feel safe in her body or in the world as a whole, okay? So I asked her, could you just please pick out, go find something in your house. Don't think about it. Just grab something to represent you, mom, dad, and the goal here, which is safety. So this is what shows up, all right? Safety is this little baby slipper, little pink baby slipper. This is mom, this is dad, this is our client.
Mom is a bowl, a cup, and dad is a knife, and the client is an eraser? What is that?
It's a little wagon.
Oh, wagon, toy wagon.
Yeah, I can't enlarge this, I'm sorry. But this already speaks volumes. Do you follow me? I mean,
yeah.
You know, the knife is a great big dangerous thing that's pointed its sharp edge towards the client. This is a very feminine, large feminine symbol, right?
The cup, yeah.
It's a bowl, actually.
Bowl.
But you notice that the client, if you took this knife and you started with a bowl and you chopped off the sides of it, you'd get this. Do you follow?
Because it's an open container.
It's an open container. It's red. So here now we have something to start working with, which is like, okay, for this to work right, mom and dad somehow have to be behind the client and the client close to safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is not a supportive energy flow here. And this is where I told you my work has gotten more and more, metaphor, system, and then symbol as relates to trauma. So these things are, embodied metaphors, right? If you got a husband and a wife, this is an old example, but if you got a husband and a wife and the husband is a pack of cigarettes and the wife is a cigarette lighter, you've got a whole series of relationships immediately worth looking at, right? She lights his fire, or she keeps him addicted, or what? We don't know yet. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? You go around and you pick these symbols like flowers, and you wait till they form into some kind of bouquets, and then you start working with the bouquets.
How did this resolve for the client?
I don't actually remember. This was a long time ago. I've done hundreds of these now, and this was very early on, and I pick it as a slide because it's relatively anonymous, and because I think this was pretty difficult. I'm not sure that the client stayed around really long enough to work with this. Okay, so now let me come back to you. Stop sharing. Okay, so you're seeing me again.
I do. So if you have just one person come to you in a one-to-one healing session, how do you do all the bringing in the pertinent people?
Skype burped. Can you say it again, please?
Yeah. If you're working one-on-one with someone, you don't have those people as stand-ins to act out the family dynamic. How do you do it with one person?
Well, I don't know myself if I'm going to necessarily start with a family constellation. If I am, I spend an hour and I ask the question, what do you want to see get better? And we look at whatever supports it, whatever blocks it. And then we start going backwards and looking for patterns in developmental or ancestral history that are relevant to this. At that point, that takes about an hour and 15 minutes. Then the client would come back, or we'd be on Skype or Zoom, and And then there would be a 2-hour session in which we would set up a constellation and work with it. And you're dealing with 2 levels. You're dealing with the symbolism of the physical objects, right? Which you recall, since I'm a shaman, they're not just dumb things. We call them object persons in my classes, right? They're embodied metaphors of various relationships. And so the job is to deal with 2 levels. One is the physical objects and their symbolism. The other is the feelings in the family system that are represented by those physical symbols. So you can't just grab the knife and take it away. You can, but it won't do anything. If you don't preserve the resonance between the physical symbols and the feelings, it's always feelings. It always comes down to feelings. Whatever is excluded or done wrong or whatever is about feelings that cannot be spoken, cannot be tolerated, something like that. So you have to see if you can help the players, that is, those beings that are represented by these physical symbols. You have to see if you can help them feel differently, help them resolve things. And in this case, since they're, you and the client go around and take turns feeling into being, go be dad. Pretend that you're dad. It's a kid's game. This requires a very childlike approach because, and this also comes right out of my indigenous training too. The stuff is very, very childlike, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. I mean, it's open, it's non-judgmental, it's playful in a sense, it's experimental, and you see what you can do. Sometimes the people and energies in it, they're not ready to resolve. Sometimes the best you can do is say, put into the mouth of each one of them the problem. Just state the problem. Just like, I couldn't love you because my dad never loved me. I don't know how. Right? But if you can do that, then typically you can come back again a little bit later, a few weeks, and the system will have shifted a bit. Be a little bit more ready to change, move.
So sometimes you'll role play with your client.
If it's an individual client, we take turns.
So you could be the dad and she could be the mom, or she could be the dad and you could be the mom, or whatever.
Yes. And vice versa.
Yeah.
I never tell the client my reactions until I hear the client's reactions, because I'm the authority and I don't want them. The trick with this work is, and it's so much, I think, trauma work. The trick is to help the people be open, experimental, and be willing to play almost, to you have 2 different chairs. Well, that's this other part of you in that other chair. That's the part of you in the chair that's scared of giving speeches. Go sit in there. Go sit in that chair and be that part. Be that part. Let's give that part a name. Talk to that part. Make friends with that part. That works. I mean, it's called internal family systems therapy. Richard Swartz is one of the big creators of this, and it goes back to Gestalt 2-chair techniques and things. But the trick is, can you get the people to relax and not be judgmental and let the parts, all of this is about letting dismembered parts of a system, whether it's the internal family, the birth family, the ancestral, it's about getting them to where they can talk to one another about their feelings. And I don't necessarily mean talk literally, but to where they can express that which has been damaging and inexpressible.
You say in your book that acceptance heals. You have to face and feel, release, reframe, rest. So that's the process of healing trauma.
Well, that's one description of it. That's a good one.
It's yours.
Yeah, I mean, there could be more elaborate descriptions of it, but yeah.
I'm thinking of Levine's studies of trauma, that the animal, like the polar bear that's darted, it has to shake. It has to do a physical kind of release. So does that play out as well, a physical moving out the stuck pain?
Sometimes. I mean, in general, we humans have lost the ability to, quote, shake off trauma the way wild animals do. They just shudder and are pretty much okay. We don't have that. There's a guy named, it's either Bertoni or Berselli, that's figured out, got a book, can't think of what it's called right now, forgive me, but you know, he has a method where you try to induce this shaking, basically by stressing, you know, putting yourself in a stressful situation and physical, you know, crouching, and so there is, I mean, that is one of the tools that people use for trauma release.
How has this played out in your own relationships? Have you been married, lived happily ever after? What's...
I never wanted to sire children. I was the oldest of 5, and I was a parent from 5, you know, age 5 on, and my mom had 5 or 6 miscarriages in the first 11 years of my existence. So I just never wanted to be a parent. I've been a step-parent a couple times. I changed so much that it's, you know, I've had good intimate relationships. I've been a step-parent twice, but I'm not in a relationship right now, and that has not been a necessarily easy part of my life. It's been rich. I've had some wonderful relationships, but we have one of the things in family constellation works, one of the patterns is, if you have to be kind of the emotional spouse of your opposite sex parent, you very often don't do marriage well. It's because in some sense you're still connected to your mom in a way, and those people tend to be more creative and lead wilder, more adventurous lives. They don't necessarily do so well in long-term stable relationships. And it doesn't matter whether you're a girl or a boy. And we're not talking incest, we're talking emotional spouse here, right? Which means that the child is starting to carry some of the load that the actual spouse should be carrying, because the spouse is not there to do it.
Right. When you do emotional freedom technique, do you think it works because of the meridian system and you're tapping on acupressure points, or it's like a form of self-hypnosis, or it's piezoelectric effect, tapping on the bones? Why do you think EFT and, well, EMDR doesn't tap, but it does brain hemisphere?
All of the above. No, I mean that. The meridian system is clearly involved. There are piezoelectric effects on the tapping. There is the placebo effect is finally being taken more seriously. Finally, all right. And there's verbal parts too. There's this profoundly important statement. Even though I blah 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 blah, I deeply love and fully accept myself. That statement is about putting the self back together. Do you understand me? I can love and accept this part of me. And the way I work, we'll not only do that kind of tapping, but we'll put that part in a chair. We'll put that energy in a chair and try to build a relationship with it, so that the outer manager person who's trying to live a life and being hampered by these feelings, this stuff that comes up, being triggered, that, you know, that person can start to say, oh, that's that part of me. I see you. I'm not flooded by you. I see you. I love you. I care about you. Could you just give me a break here and let me finish this, and then we'll talk? Okay. And that you can get that to work with many people.
Have you tried? Go ahead.
But again, it depends on how willing they are to be open and childlike and experimental, and that can be hard. We're talking about feelings of overwhelm. Trauma is feelings of overwhelm that have kicked in the fight, flight, freeze system and literally dismembered parts of the neurology of the brain. And again, read Dan Siegel's Mind Sight about that. Super good book.
When you said that you've also used neuro-linguistic programming in your work?
I use some techniques of that. I'm not trained in it, but the techniques of neuro-linguistic programming have kind of just spread in all kinds of different ways.
What's an example of one of them that you use?
Well, anchors. Obviously, you try to, physical anchors are like when you need to remind yourself of a certain kind of feeling. We're going to establish an anchor with it. You go inside into the mental space of someone, and you work with. You have them image their family or the problem or whatever, and you start asking questions like, well, how big is it? How close is it? What does it look like? Can you look at it? Ask it to move away or ask it to move closer. There's a guy named Lucas Dirks, D-E-R-K-S, who I think is called the Social Panorama. He's got a whole system of therapy based on this internal. It's comes right out of NLP. Those kind of things have spread, and that's I learned that kind of stuff in shamanic journeying too. There's a lot of overlap. There's just different cultural names for these things. Guided mental imagery is very much like shamanic journeying. It just depends on what your cultural context is.
Right. Got it. Excuse me. So, what's your next book? Where are you going next?
I don't know. I am just about 75. I am semi-retired. I would love to write a book on all this whole large area of collective and individual and internal trauma, how it works, because the mainstream traumatologists are just beginning to deal with collective trauma. And the family constellation world is way ahead of them in that regard. And again, I'm trying to build bridges again. So I would like to do that. I would love to write something on the social impact of the conduit metaphor, but
sorry.
But I don't have a tribe of graduate students to read through all of the stuff that to catch up with, because people have done all kinds of things with these ideas, including say they're all wet, which they're not. Those are the two areas that I would most like to write in. I don't know whether I will or not. I'm a shaman. I have ritual work. I have healing work. I have music to make. I have woodworking and boats to be with. And I don't know how writing the two books that I wrote recently was quite an ordeal writing them, as you probably know. Some of the worst of it being all the damn proofreading and all that stuff, So if I had support, I would sit down. If I had 2 years of support, I'd sit down and write one of these books, no question. But I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm a deeply spiritual person. I have healing work to do that's important, and I have ritual work to do that's important. And at this stage of my life, I'm not sure what's going to take precedence. I'm at a point now where I'm starting to think about that.
Have we left anything out that you would like readers to know about family constellations or dealing with trauma? Or
You know, you got much deeper into that than I thought we would get. So I think we did very well on that. No, I think we're pretty complete here.
okay. The last question I want to ask you